Good evening, good afternoon, my astro enthusiast followers. I am here with the video on Mercury retrograde in Capricorn, and I'm going to take a look at it live with you and see what I think about it. There are currently two cats surveilling my house, so you may hear some interesting background noises. Um, So, what we're now looking at is the chart where Mercury goes retrograde. It also when it conjuncts Venus at the end of Capricorn, not too far from Pluto, and it does sextile Neptune, so it's separating from a sextile to Neptune. And this is sort of the opening note for this retrograde. Let's animate the chart a bit. Animate chart. I have to go all the way down to animate the chart. Let's see, and this is our first drop of the day. I don't know what they dropped. Because that's the 29th, and soon it will go retrograde. Let's take it a couple of hours. Not yet. Very soon. It is happening very soon. And there we already are. This happens right before the new year, where I am. So you have to adjust the location. I'm in the Middle East. And this is where Mercury is going to go retrograde, applying to re-sextile Neptune. So when I think about the sextile to Neptune, I think about a message that can go viral. So that can be, or a sort of service breakdown, because Mercury retrograde is more about things not flowing as usual, and Neptune can make it viral. So they can be whatever bugs there are, that can be a viral bug or a viral hacking or rethinking of something, because the location is Capricorn. So that would be in organizations, government, anything Saturn ruled. And now let's see what Mercury is going to do in Capricorn. So as of pretty much nearly January 1st, it goes retrograde. Its first angle is the sextile to Neptune, which we talked about. Then we can go to January 8th, where it creates a trine to Uranus. So that, again, with Mercury being children, messages, nervous system, agreements, contracts, trade, in a retrograde motion, so something not going well, not flowing smoothly, rethinking something, perhaps a little bit what happened in the all digital crypto coins, and then there can be a rethinking, reassessing the technology, reassessing the agreements. I think the only survivor was Ethereum, and I don't know how is Ethereum doing. The trine to Uranus can, because it's an outer planet, then of course it's going to be something to do with the wider scope of things. Again, it's a harmonious aspect, it's not a hard aspect, so it's not something that will for sure happen, but there can be a possibility of reassessing our rebellious strategies. But because Mercury is in organization, so that can be organizations reassessing how they deal with reactionist or rebellious people. Perhaps another decision concerning agriculture, concerning the farms. Maybe we'll hear about a certain revolt concerning Netherlands, causing the government to rethink something. Um, a, a certain decision concerning China, maybe we'll hear about a certain revolt concerning Netherlands, causing the government to rethink something. A certain decision concerning it's everything Uranus and Taurus. So we've seen Uranus and Taurus has to do with the food chain, has to do with LGBTQ rights as well, because it's ruled by Venus, and Venus is the way we relate to things. And here, Uranus gives us a non-conforming, gender non-conforming perspective. Would you mind not to make noise down there? It's a puppy. And I have no idea how it got in, but it found a plastic bag and it's celebrating. So I'm probably not going to get a lot of sleep tonight. Yeah, so that's something that we can expect with Uranus. Uranus is also retrograde, so both parties rethinking how they're going to move next. Again, Mercury in Capricorn is Mercury Saturn ruled, and is Mercury hierarchy ruled. So this is the messages concerning like how we deal with, on the personal level, how we deal with organizations, how we deal with the government, how we correspond with, I don't know, tax collectors, because that's the time for, reports and stuff. How do we correspond with government officials, perhaps even policing, not necessarily police, but policing parties, Saturn-like figure in our life, or how do they communicate? Like they're reflecting, how do they communicate? What agreements do they make? What adjustments do they make to their contracts? January 11th, Mercury is going to square Chiron. So Mercury retrograde squaring Chiron, and Chiron is already direct at this stage. That's interesting. It can be, it can be words that stir up a painful wound, or reflecting upon words that were said. That can also be words that caused a certain wounding to the sense of self. Not a good time to initiate the talk. To be, this is a time where you might want to, if you don't have to, you definitely don't want to initiate something. You might be called into a certain correspondence that addresses the wound or touches on a sense of self wound in the Aries house. So let's see if I can get this bag out of the way. No, it's taking the Friday bread. Gosh, I didn't think it was that tempting to cats, but it will have to find its way to the fridge. I thought it was just a plastic bag. I didn't understand why it's so interested. I thought it was just a puppy, but it had bread in it. The challah, the Friday bread. So I'm like, no, I like it too much, and it's not healthy for the pup. So yeah. So this is going to be the square to Chiron. Moving on, Mercury will trine Ketu, right? This is Ketu, or is it trine in Rahu? No, Rahu. So it's going to sextile Ketu and trine Rahu. Again, we're not within an eclipse. So although it had been a part of an eclipse, but it's the nodes have moved on since, and so I don't foresee that to necessarily be too interesting. It is still within orb to trine Uranus, and then that is more interesting to me than the nodes were not within eclipses. Maybe there will be a slight triggering. I don't even think there will be a triggering of an eclipse point here, to be frank. So not too worried about that. If you want to argue with me, then you can very well say how you feel about that. And let's see, I think January 27. What is this? Because here Mercury is already, here Mercury is already direct. So let's go backwards. Because Mercury is going to be direct, and then it's, yeah, it's going to move into direct motion in January 18. So, and then it's going to retrine the nodes and re-square Chiron and retrine Uranus. But the retrograde motion is mainly until January 18th. Now, because all of these points up until the sextile to Neptune are still the shade of Mercury, then we need to take into account that even though Mercury goes direct on January 18, it's not before February. And let's do this to be exact. So let's go to February. And now, and this is 6, where Neptune re-sextiles, Mercury re-sextiles Neptune. But this is already 1 degree outside of the shade. The 22nd degree of Capricorn is the shade period. So if we want to go before that, when does Mercury enter the shade period? So we're going to go back to December 2022, and let's look at the Mercury sextiling Neptune here on December 25. And that would be Mercury in the 22nd degree of Capricorn. This is where Mercury enters its shade period. Okay, well, it's going to go 2 degrees more. It's going to go to the 24th degree. We've seen that. And the 24th degree is the shade period. So right up until February, let's see. First of all, it enters shade. Let's see, when does it enter the shade period? Because this is already the square to... no, this is too much. So let's do 1 day earlier, so you can get the shade period as well. I'm looking to, okay, this is how you animate the chart, 1 day backwards. And Mercury is here, it's 27, so let's go to the 24th degree. December 3rd, oh, so Mercury is already entered the shade period. This is December 3rd. No, but we are in the wrong. Oh, we're in the wrong one. This is the 24th degree of Sag. That, yeah, I noticed it doesn't make sense. Yeah. Now we're talking. So let's do 1 more day. Another day. And another day. Oh, yeah. So only on December 28th. December 28th, Mercury enters the point where it will be retrograding, and that would be the shade point up until 24th degree of Capricorn is where Mercury will remain in its shade until February. And if you want to, let's see the February. See if I can go to the February so I can give you the entire shade period. And that was after the sextile. And let's animate the chart to 1 more day. And Mercury is already in the 25th, so that's around the 7th or 6th of February that we're concerned with. And after that, right, the 7th of February here, Mercury leaves its shade period. So all the things that we associate with Mercury, being retrograde, bugs, miscommunications, reflecting, having to talk about things with Saturn-like figures in our life, and you need to see where is it in your chart. Is it the seventh house? Is it a relationship? Fifth house, your children. 10th house, your boss or one of your parents. First house, something that you need to communicate, and so on and so forth. So all in all, if I take a look at the aspects that Mercury makes, two harmonious aspects, one to Neptune and the other one to Uranus, and one more challenging, basically two more challenging if I include the shade period, aspects to Chiron. So the Chiron part is the one that it's not concerning, but it's going to be a bit more difficult to deal with because that correspondence that you will have will touch on a wound. It can actually be, and because it is a square, then it's something that's dredging up stuff. If it was a harmonious aspect, I could say it could be healing words, but then the healing or the purging can be through a bit of a conflict or a bit of an argument. So those two dates are the ones you want to take a look at, and this is February. If I'm looking, no, 20 is already too late. So it's basically in January. Let's go to January again. And we have January 11 is the square to Chiron, and January 27 is another, the second square when Mercury is already direct, but within its shade period. Now, what's interesting about February, and Mercury is already going to be direct, it's going to trine Chiron. So you can expect the resolution, or you can expect a better correspondence between that Mercury and Chiron on February, around February 20, depending on where you are living. But that is going to happen already from Aquarius. So Mercury in Capricorn, all in all, it's not an easy one simply because it's in Capricorn and it's ruled by Saturn, so it's the planet of delays ruling a planet that is in a phase of delays and misunderstandings, and at the same time, that the funny thing about the Mercury retrograde, it's both the time of things going wrong, but those things going wrong have a certain order to them, and there's a certain order to them. There's a certain direction. There's a reason why you have to do it over. There's a reason why you have to adjust. Because there was something that you didn't take into account, and this is why you need to reflect. This is why you need to do it over. There are certain issues that were not discussed, were maybe swiped under the rug, and now you have to deal with them. And with the square to Chiron, they don't create a wound. It's more like that they touch on a wound. So communication can fail, or communication can be more triggering in a combative way, or because one of the parties has something to do with the sense of self that is being hurt there, or that is being questioned there. And Aries rules the head, so it can be also the intelligence of the person, the identity of the person, that someone at an authority figure does not acknowledge, or has to rethink how they address it, so that the person will not be hurt, or they're going to get a very reactive sort of, bickering from the person whose sense of identity or if you or intelligence, like if you have, if you're the Aries person, then that can be something around a certain type of intelligence, or a certain type of a sense of, not necessarily sense of self-value, but your sense of self and or your intelligence can be either put to question or by an authority figure, On a mundane level, that can be a time where a certain type of communication from the regime or from governments or from Saturn-like figures is, with the sextile to Neptune, either leaked, but with the square to Chiron is that touches on a wound where the individuality of people have been hurt. And that can create a big reaction where the regime will have to change the way they communicate, will have to change the way they agree on things. And that can be a bit legislative simply for the agreements, the agreements facet of Mercury and the Saturn, like the long-term implications. So agreements that have long-term implications that are in the government are rules. And the people whose individuality or people may feel like the government is messing with their intellect, okay, that can create stir up a reaction that will give those who are the Saturn-like figures a chance to rethink, to reassess, to change the legislation, because the individuals are not having it. So it can be, but here Aries is usually young men. Because of the nearness to Aries with an E, it can also be feminist issue, but not due to the nature of Aries with an A, but Aries with an E. Let's put on asteroids for just a second because I want to see. Do I have asteroids here? Yes. I want to see where Aries is at. No, so Aries is already far from Chiron here. So I don't see that being the issue at hand. So no, it's mainly going to be, on a mundane level, young men or men who serve in the military. They can be correspondence between the regime and military people that are not having it, that are not satisfied with what the regime is doing. For example, in Israel, there was a general that threatened, but basically called people to go out and demonstrate against certain decisions of the government, not regarding the army, but actually regarding education. And that general basically called people to go out and demonstrate and said, I will be demonstrating too. And this is a very interesting turn of events because that was a military person calling people to use their democratic right to demonstrate against something that the government does regarding to education, so not regarding to the army at all. So it was not an army or military, but it was a military man calling people to go out and demonstrate. So the Mercury retrograde can be something like that, can be something like militant or like people who are in the military not having it, having a wound stirring up regarding to like their intelligence being threatened or their sense of self being compromised, or an experience of their sense of self being compromised in favor of the bureaucracy, the plutocracy, the regime. And what these people have to say is not necessarily about the army, but it is something to pay attention to, because on a mundane level, it can mean that people will listen to generals more than they listen to the regime. And that can have a mixture of long-term effects. So this is why Mercury retrograde in a Saturn-ruled sign is very likely to have long-term effect, simply because of the nature of the sign ruling the sign that the planet ruling the sign that it's at, and that's Saturn. So anything that happens, I addressed it also when I talked about Venus moving through Capricorn, and how it is good to understand that what Venus begins there is something that is going to have an impact, a long-term impact, that you need to take into account that it will have a 28 years old cycle of impact. In here we see again that the moon will be growing as of 20 February. So let's go back to January with sun. Um, Back to January. So January 2, the Mercury is already retrograde and the moon is still growing. So we will have a cycle of the moon growing when Mercury enters its retrograde phase, but then the moon is waning. So um, that can kind of diminish the effect. And that would be an interesting chart to animate. Let's do it in about a week. And in about a week, we see the moon is already waning here in Leo, while Mercury is still retrograding. So it gives us it's half like some of the things are starting under this Mercury retrograde, but then as Mercury retrograde proceeds, we have culmination of other things. So it's going to be a bit of a mixture of both. It's a Mercury retrograde that both begins a cycle, and we need to pay attention especially to the beginning of the cycle because the moon is growing, and this is where whatever we do can have long-term effects, supported by the growing of the moon. And when the moon is waning, then perhaps what we are doing is more culminating up to 28 years old cycle because of the nature of Saturn. So it's only a Mercury retrograde, but it does have Saturn-like effects. So we do expect those decisions that are being made and those reflections to be relevant to up to the previous cycle of Mercury retrograde in Capricorn up to 28 years ago. It's not something we usually pay attention to. When we talk about Mercury retrograde, we usually think about this cycle. But it's a cycle within cycles, within cycles, within cycles, within cycle. And depending on how far deep, how deeply you want to go, there is a place to go. And you probably will find certain things that happened the last time Saturn was in Aquarius, and certain decisions when Mercury was also retrograde at that time that might be playing role in your life even today. And that can also be a time to change certain beliefs, certain thought patterns, certain patterns of behaviors that you may have been working years to change, and that are related to your decision making, your thinking process, not necessarily your beliefs, higher mind like Jupiter, but definitely it can be like a culmination of a certain CBT process that you're doing, changing your decisions, changing your habits. If you've been doing journaling, if you've been doing writing, then this can be a time where you think back and you realize that certain decisions that you took, 28 years ago are now still having impact in your life. And you can also do a little bit of change and transformation and transition, because it is those small steps that you do, not necessarily on a daily basis, but the small steps that you do regularly that kind of accumulate to bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger steps. If I look at even as much as, when I started my YouTube channel, and then I look, okay, I started this one in 2013, and then I look now to 2023, I will already have accumulated a certain process, a certain growth, a certain something that I do. There's also a corporate of knowledge that I can look back to, and that is karma accumulating. Yeah, there's many things that are documented from that time that you can go back to and say, oh wow, the way that I was thinking even back then. Before I began to do astrology videos, I was doing manifestations, and then I said, well, manifestations for things to do with Saturn can take longer. And this is why you can try a manifestation tricks, and that will work out easier and that will be more difficult. Or that manifestation, how do you manifest with the cycle of the moon? And that was already a preparation for me talking here about, astrology in length almost daily, and how those things kind of build up. Um, so anything more to do with Mercury and Capricorn? Um, I'm looking at some. I'm actually looking at a driving license. I just have to do my driving license. So these are also things that you could run into, like getting a driver's license or getting it updated, or my belief is that we're going to have cars with wings. So why aren't we all doing flight license, because we're going to need that. Um, Getting another type, because Mercury is transportation, and getting another type of license. So you might be thinking to get a yacht license or get the plane license, or upgrade your existing driving license so you can drive a van or something like that. You might be rethinking those type of decisions. Um, we are regulations concerning certain technologies. So it can be regulations concerning uh, phones, smartphones, concerning vehicles, concerning what is considered a vehicle that you can drive. So all kinds of regulations to do with that. Patents as well, a little bit of innovation. So those things we might see being reconsidered. Um, Again, the type of hacking is, again, big sites, .gov sites kind of hacking. We've already seen one in Iran recently, if I'm not mistaken, by Anonymous, but that was before this cycle of Mercury in Capricorn. Um, Anything more? Well, Mercury is going to conjunct Pluto, but when it leaves the retrograde shade, so Pluto is less the point of the retrograde, I believe. More like regular stuff. It can be even technology associated with agriculture, um, or regulation over technology associated with agriculture. Now everybody is growing plants with hydroponic plants and all of that. So some of that might be regulated. How can you use it? All kinds of stuff like that. Um, so more technology related to growing food or to be self-sustainable. People doing homesteading, there are already regulations, and I talked about that when I talked about Netherlands. Um, I think that's about it. Of course, well, there can be the real estate or public housing, kind of reassessment of public housing regulations, um, simply because of the more survivalistic Saturnian needs, long-term housing, and the real estate facet of Mercury. So they can be thinking about long-term housing, public housing, housing provided by the government, um, fingers pointed at the government, what is happening with public housing, who can apply to public housing, how do things need to change, whether with subsidies or availability or new programs regarding that. So that can be another, like people might look to a form of public housing as a solution to the real estate crisis, because there's just too many people that don't have a solution, and the understanding that the private market, with Capricorn, we are looking for organizations, for big organizations, for solutions. So In Aquarius, it would be more like, people deciding to build a kibbutz or new communities or whatnot. In Capricorn, it's more like we look to the government to solve this. So people will still be looking to the government to solve this. My prediction is that the solution of the government either will be very partial or will be too late. Might be too late to address that, and then Pluto will already delve into Aquarius, and the people will begin to say, well, the government is not solving our problems, so we need to build this community on this land, maybe using weapons, maybe I don't know what to protect. And the fact that the army and the military can be in conflict with the regime in this Mercury retrograde is very symbolic of the time and transition when Pluto is delving into Aquarius, because the people might be backed up by ex-military people or current military people, regardless of the rank, and they might be supported by the army, and be able to have new communities guarded by the army. Note that in many places, veterans, like in the United States, veterans only get public housing for like 9 months, and then they have to go for another company, and most of them deal with complex PTSD. So like they don't, like, you don't, I wish you could recover within 9 months, but in most cases you do not. And so these people might choose to form militias, and as we delve into, when we have something that because when we move from Capricorn to Aquarius, we move from exhausting the ability of the hierarchy to resolve a conflict into the power of the people. So this is the government can do only so much, and where the government ends, the power of the people begins. And here with Mercury, it's also real estate, it's also trade, it's also economy, it's also children, the ability of the government to protect children. And then the things that come to assist is the rebellious streak of Uranus and Taurus. So that can be, farmers, that can be people who still have food coming to assist. That can be people that are off the land. It can also be artists. It can also be the voice of singers and musicians that use their voice or come up with songs that lift up the morale of the people. And with Neptune still in Pisces, I don't know, like Neptune, Pisces, I don't, like, people might turn to drugs or something. Or psychedelics. I don't know if psychedelics is exactly Neptune in Pisces, but people might go to these spiritual resorts. And the Chiron, if in Aries, later going direct, is it can be more the people whose sense of who felt like somebody does not acknowledge their intelligence, and sort of puts their intelligence to ridicule by all kinds of weird agreements, weird regulations, like, no, the people won't take that. And then there can be, ex-military people or ex-intelligence people. Then this can also something that's very much associated with the Aries archetype, to say, okay, no, we've had it, and now they support the people in their new innovation. That can, of course, can lead to many implications, varied implications. But the fact is that this is a Mercury retrograde cycle that is within the scope of Pluto moving and delving into Aquarius. So this whole reflection thingy is about, governments trying to show the best that they can at tackling whatever this crisis brings up. I believe housing and trade crisis will be a great deal of it. And that kind of pushes us to seek our solution, or seek a sense of empowerment for the things that we didn't find in Capricorn. and to seek that sense of empowerment within the domain of Aquarius, wherever it is, on both a mundane and a personal level. So we have to read that in context. Last Mercury retrograde for Pluto, for the Pluto in Capricorn before Pluto moves into Aquarius. And I believe this is the time where Pluto already moves to Aquarius during this time. So not for good, but when Pluto delves into Aquarius during this time, I definitely see that being a context of what we can expect, people transitioning from putting the power in the hands of the big government to resolve their troubles into attempting to find a more people to people based solutions, but not local, more like a global unity with the world. Okay, so even if you take a look at the demonstrations of the farmers in Netherlands, they were supported by all, not only farmers, but all the people who support the farmers and see the farmers as, you know, hardworking people that grow food at the time of difficulty to find food, and all the farmers giving us all this information about how to grow, how to preserve seeds, how to store food, how to get prepared, what do you need, and sharing their knowledge with the people in a very comradely, fashion. And we see that the handing our hopes on the government to assist farmers now becomes government going against farmers in Netherlands. So if this happens in Netherlands, then you can't really sue them in the International Court for War Crimes, right? So it's in Den Haag. So what happens is that a certain group that dealt with government regulations and perhaps used to have government assisting farmers, government assisting with loans, with depth, with resources, with watering, with the government assisting the people who grow food. Now the government is going against them, and now they're like, okay, we have to turn to other means. We have to turn to the people. We have to reunite with the people, and we have to have the support of the people, and even the support of the people in the face of the regulation of the government. And that is something that that's something we're entering the Mercury retrograde with. So again, whatever will be decided there will have very long-term effects. So when Pluto is going to spend 20 years in Aquarius, we're going to be encouraged to seek our answers and to be empowered in the Aquarius zone for a good reason. One of the things, I've been watching videos about Anonymous lately, and we've seen Anonymous address themselves as an idea, not as an organization. That this is very important because they're already speaking Aquarius language. They don't speak corporate language. They don't speak organization. They don't want to be called organization, and they're attacking governments across the board. So they've attacked U.S., Iran, Putin himself, showing solidarity with the people, marginalized group, be it LGBTQ rights, and attacking mainly government websites and organizations. And they act as a decentralized idea, basically. Decentralized, it's just groups of people, and basically they've even attacked North Korea successfully. So we see another form of power perhaps becoming more and more prominent, uh, and tending to a need that was not answered by the governments. So wherever the government's been slacking up, we see there is another power, tremendous power that is able to interfere with websites, with servers of governments, with huge sites. Definitely a power that is noticeable, definitely a power that is potent, kind of correcting the hierarchies, the organizations, the governments from the outside and using mass technology. Um, so, definitely this Mercury retrograde, we know that the wars are also hacking wars and so on and so forth. Um, but usually those hacking wars are from within the government. It's like the intelligence is doing that. And now we see that the potency of hacking teams or hacking societies, basically hacking societies, um, is becoming pronounced. And so it can be that certain people might put their power in those groups or seek for, up until now, these groups have been destroying things, exposing things, leaking things, but now people are going to want to have solutions. They're going to want to have that which the government did not yield. They're going to want to have their rights granted. They're going to want to have food on the table. They're going to want to have a place to live. They're going to want to have a sense of community and belonging. They're going to want to have their freedom of speech respected. And all these promises are going to be something that those groups, whether anonymous or whichever hacking societies, surveillance or leakage based information societies, are going to be asked to provide. Um, and the hype that kept, let's say, Anonymous so supported was while Pluto was in Capricorn. So the people who were being exposed were big organizations, big government, big corporations, elites, and then they were the ones being the outcast, the ones doing the exposure. Now we're moving away from that. So people are going to start asking, who are the hackers, so on and so forth. And but it's going to take some years like, even if those questions will be asked, at least in the beginning, I don't expect these questions to be asked in as much as where do we live, what do we eat, how, like, what's going on now. We know that the government didn't sort XYZ. Okay, now there is a set of expectations that people will come to Aquarius with. And so this is the last Mercury in Capricorn that is touching, readjusting the anything that has a boss. Basically, anything that has a big boss is going through that final, perhaps legislative readjustment in quite a while. And again, countries like the United States that are having their Pluto return might be having legislative decisions that will be in effect or will affect the next Pluto cycle. Even with Mercury, with Mercury retrograde, it's less prominent because it doesn't touch that Pluto point. But it definitely, when it will conjunct after the retrograde, it definitely will be more equipped to start that new cycle. Do I think there's going to be, like we heard talks from both right and left wing about the the Constitution not being absolute. So I don't think we'll be seeing a new constitution in the past in the next 6 months, but we do have to take that into account, and those things that were questions were the First and the Second Amendment, or the First and if I'm not mistaken, it was the Fourth Amendment, but mainly the First Amendment. The First Amendment regarding freedom of speech, regarding freedom of assembly, regarding basically everything that defines the democracy of the United States as a liberal democracy. And that is very, very, and those questioning of that amendment came from both left and right wing. It's something that we can't ignore. And this is also something that unites the people, because everybody can agree that if we care for certain freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, even if we don't agree on weapons, we definitely agree that the people should have power in the face of the regime. And the people's power is the basis for any monopoly that anybody has over the violence or over the power. Any legitimization that any organization can have for the monopoly over violence, even when people are armed. So that's another context. On a more personal level, it's pretty much looking at where Capricorn is in your chart, and on a personal level, it can be just another Mercury retrograde in Capricorn, and any Mercury retrograde in Capricorn bears long-term influences, and that's something that we have been contending with. So you need to look to that Capricorn placement in your chart, and the things will come up. Especially pay attention to the time where Mercury is going to square Chiron. Understand that what is being stirred, understand what is being put to question, understand what you already know about yourself, and understand what serves your sense of autonomy now, what sort of autonomy and freedom of being yourself do you need right now in that field in your life, and argue for that. That's pretty much what is expected. If you want me to go quickly over the houses, then I can do that. Why not? So let's begin with Aries. So Aries, this is going to be in your 10th house, and so communication with your one-to-one, your bosses, maybe one of your parents, or the places where you are a boss are going to be put to question. Issues are going to stir up. Your boss might question you. And you know that you probably are coming. It's probably something that stirs up a wound in you, but it's something that you already can come prepared for. And just think about, what you already know about yourself, what you already need, and understand that nobody can question your mind, okay, your intelligence. Nobody can question your sense of self. Nobody can define you, okay? You alone define who you are. Not your bosses, not your parents, not anybody else. And then how is your definition of you serving you? and you don't have to justify yourself to anyone, but they are the ones needing to respect that. And it's what's important is to, you know, make your point and understand you're dealing with very calculated figures. Um, but still, like they're gonna have to change the way they address you. This can stir up aggression from you. This can stir up, you know, rash words or hurting or sulking words. Um, like the way you used to react to these situations might be dredged up again. But then again, remember, if somebody's questioning your sense of self, you can't be blamed for reactive abuse. Okay, they can't hold you accountable without holding themselves accountable. So you're going to need to remember that. Of course, the best is if you don't, you know, react aggressively, but you state your point and you defend your point, and you don't let anybody question who you are, or you know, or your intelligence. They can question your opinion, but you can't question your intelligence. So that's something to remember. Taurus ascendant. So for Tauruses, this is happening in your Okay, so Aries, that's going to be, yeah, Aries, that's going to be, I'm sorry, not your 10th, your 11th house. Is that true? No, it's 10th house. Taurus is going to be 12th, 11th, 10th, 9th house. Okay, now I get it. This happening in your 9th house, so you might question your beliefs. You might question, it can be needed to file something or to close a degree, or to do something bureaucratic to finalize something that you've been doing in that 9th house. Maybe you need to renew a passport. It could be something as simple as that. And that either, or maybe, you know, you have to pay something to do with your higher studies, or something as simple as that. It can be, you know, certain arguments with your teacher, instructor, if that sort of relationship, guru or something like that. But what you need to pay attention to is that the square from Chiron is going to come from your 12th house. So there is a bit of a wounding of your sense of self that you're not quite aware of. And it will stir up a bit of a blind spot within you. And again, remember, and this is especially important because it's happening, the Chiron is in your 12th house, so somebody might question your sanity or might try to do gaslighting, okay, to try to make you question your reality. Remember that whatever is coming from that Capricorn placement has to be taken with a grain of salt. And remember, again, people can argue with your opinions. They can argue with your arguments. They cannot argue with your intelligence, and they definitely cannot argue with your sanity, okay, or the way you see reality. Your view of reality has a place in the world. If somebody tries to challenge that, then they're being violent and they should be held accountable, and they should be either called out either directly or, you know, through anonymous like organizations. But for sure, do not let anybody step over your sense of clarity and your sense of reality. Now, it doesn't mean that you cannot change your mind. It doesn't mean that you, let's say, I don't know, you have Pluto in the 12th house, so you might get to be a tendency to have paranoia or something like that. So you already know what you have. Whatever you have there, you already know what you have. And you can discern whether you're being called out for something that you know that you're dealing with, or alternatively, that there is an abuse of, or, you know, sort of like abuse of power that's happening there, not due to Pluto being in Capricorn, but due to that being a hierarchical sign. Always take into account that whoever it is, your teacher, your, somebody from the embassy or whatnot, always take into account that they may have a point to them. They might just stir up something that wounds you or that addresses the wound you have, but they may be true to their words. However, if it is the case that they try to do wrong things with this information, then like you need to be aware that this is where they're going to try to attack, and hold them very much accountable for these attacks, which you will be very much inclined to do. Although Mars is still retrograde in Gemini, if you strike back, and then if they initiate something during a Mars retrograde, if you strike back, you're very much going to have the power, and very likely to have the upper hand, as long as you don't succumb to being, overly aggressive or, overly impulsive, which you might tend to be. These are more your weaknesses. Ascendant Gemini. So this is happening in your 8th house, and you might be called in to speak with your accountant. You might be called in to speak with your banker. You might be called in to even to speak with your spouse about your joint resources, and you need to make new decisions there. But these decisions, they are kind of, maybe you have dreams and goals and your finances, or you are in debt, and your dreams and goals are being threatened by this debt. And again, remember, there is an act of negotiation here. Okay, even if, let's say, you're being litigated, remember that there were 2 years of COVID. Remember that you have a lot of points for you. Remember, you should not have to give up your goals and dreams simply because the current economic situation does not allow for XYZ. It doesn't mean that you should not hold yourself accountable. It doesn't mean that you should not do what is in your power to do. But sometimes your dreams and goals can be something that will actually lead to maintaining for your well-being, and as well as advancing you financially. This is also the house of crowdfunding. So your crowdfunding, if maybe you're crowdfunding and your the way you deal or manage finances needs to be addressed. So that is something that you will be looking at. Whatever you get, whatever gains you have that are from other people or through other people, both 8th house type of gains like investments or debts or loans or interests or whatnot, or dealing with the accountant or dealing with the business partner or spouse, then that would be at odds with whatever crowdfunding you do, or your goals and dreams, or even your relations with your colleagues and acquaintances. So this is something you need to prepare yourself for. Remember, you should not have to be put in a situation ever where you need to give up your goals and dreams. There has to be a certain level where you're allowed to do what is advancing your goals and dreams within reason. Okay, so if, let's say, you want to travel around the world, then you might not be able to travel around the world right now, but maybe you can be exposed to people from other worlds, other countries, or other cultures, or do it through social media, or you may require that you have access to doing something that is as close as possible within reason, even while you're paying your debt, and so on and so forth, or even while you are returning this investment, and so on and so forth. So that is something that you need to consider. Ascendant Cancer. So this is happening in your 7th house. Pluto is about to leave your 7th house finally, but reach your 8th. So for some of you, it can be that the situation is that for the past, 15 years, you have been dealing with relationships and dealing with issues of power within your intimate relationships and business partners. And it can be that your spouse became your business partner, and you're about to embark on learning not only how you raise kids together, if you raise kids, but also how you manage your joint wealth. And it may be that in the beginning of this marriage, you were asking for a prenuptial because you were the wealthy partner, and now things have turned upside down, and it is your partner that wants to make sure that the prenuptial is also adjusted to include their own wealth and their own safety. And the tables have turned in your one-to-one relations. It can be business partnership, it can be open enemies, and it can be your significant other. This Mercury retrograde is going to touch on not your eighth house, unless the ruler of your seventh is in your eighth or the ruler of your eighth is in your seventh, but your seventh house. Intimate communication. Okay, and intimacy is around trust. Issues of trust with anybody you have one-to-one partnership, whether business or marriage or long-term relationship. And this is a time where that might be at odds with your 10th house. So your partner and your boss. Sometimes it can be a partner-parent sort of a fight that exists. Or somebody's authority is being threatened. Somebody at authority, somebody who is maybe your boss, or maybe for some people even the regime in the country. Let's say, I don't know, you're an LGBTQ couple that got married, and now you decided that you want to establish you want to establish your marriage, and then the regime of the country is somehow, threatened by that. But this is extreme cases. On a personal level, it's usually perhaps your commitment that you take in your relationships are at odds with commitments you have as a boss, or to your boss, or to your career, or your self-image, because 10th house is also the self-image, and it can be to certain decisions or something that your partner, maybe you want to be official, and then that can affect your self-image, or that there are certain decisions, or maybe your partner requires you to take certain decisions that affect your self-image. I'm trying to think about concrete examples here. Perhaps you are a CEO of some company and you've thought very well of how you present yourself, and now something happened, and as a result of that, you talk with your partner and you decide that your social media profile is going to be the picture of both of you as a couple everywhere. And that's true to your LinkedIn, that's true to your, Facebook, your Tumblr, your Twitter, your whatnot. And now that affects your image, because you have presented an image of one person who is in charge, and now everybody is going to have to see a picture of two people, and that's going to, that's a simple thing, that's a simple communication that can affect the way you're being seen. Sometimes for the better, maybe you're afraid that it's going to hurt your sense of individuality in your career, but what it actually does is that makes you more relatable to other people that now feel more comfortable to talk about their partners, or to ask for days off to be with their partners, and so on and so forth. So it can be something like that. Leo. For Leo, this is happening in your 6th house. And that can be even around bringing in a new pet. It can be a certain sort of job or service that you give to the world, that is not necessarily your goals and dreams, but it's just a service, your act of service, your sometimes daytime job. It's also a house of your health. And so there's certain communication, maybe certain bureaucracy around these topics. And this is at odds with either higher learning, or your worldview, or your relationship with people abroad. Perhaps you are planning to travel, and Mercury retrograde causes you to need to have more correspondences because of your health situation, or maybe you need health insurance. And maybe the reason you want to travel is to feel, like you're going on an adventure and you're doing, being brave, but then, your doctor requires that you do so and so, or your health insurance require for documents from your doctor or something like that. And, that kind of hurts the sort of, maybe you wanted to go on a hike in the mountains, or wanted to go on a hike in, foreign land, and you have to speak with your doctor about it. And the whole point you wanted to do it to begin with was to feel, vibrant, and to feel your vitality, and to go, to celebrate what your body can do. And then that sort of correspondence. It can also be that you're taking on a new pet, and now you want to travel, and you're planning to travel, and now this pet, you have to travel with this pet, and you have to maybe readjust, what countries can you visit, and so on and so forth. So it can be something as simple as that, or that certain requirements, perhaps your daytime job requires you to do something that while you were planning on a vacation, and now you have to either set boundaries there, or stand your ground, or understand what are you receiving when you're compromising, how are you going to get compensated for that. There's a lovely YouTube Shorts channel for someone who does boundary setting in the workplace. I don't remember what the channel is called, and I was kind of thinking about that sort of a situation where they say toodaloo to your workplace or something. It doesn't necessarily mean that you leave, but you definitely have to either set a boundary or make sure that your interests are being met, and your worldview is being met, or your desire to go on a vacation or an adventure or higher learning, or to take on higher learning, is being met, or while it is initially colliding with whatever is happening in your sixth. So Virgo. For Virgos, this is happening in your fifth house, and the conflict with Chiron is in your eighth house. So you may be, maybe your child took your credit card and decided to pay for all kinds of weird games in your cell phone without your knowing, you know? And then, oh, damn, I have been dealing with security issues around my resources, around my finances, and I have been picking the same password for everything. And now you have to deal with that, and, the child stirs up that it can be something, like that. Or maybe you'll be deciding to bring a new child or to start a creative project, and that project requires certain resources that are not your money. So something that happens there in the fifth affects resources that are not your own. So it can have many ways, shapes, and forms. If you have like gambling issues, then that can be a time where you will need to find healing for that. If you're a person who has taken accountability and did not find, for example, healing, or did not find something, so this will be a time where you will have to readdress that, and will have to stand your ground, and will say, if you're the type of person who did do steps to be accountable but was not supported by society, by the regime, by Saturn figures in your life, then then you will have to stand your ground. But in any case, that issue of the fifth, whether it's a creative project, a risk that you're taking, a hobby, or your child is drawing in on the resources of the eighth house in a way that touches a wound that is already evident there, that you will need to address, one way or another. Either you will need to speak with your child and teach them about finances, or you will need to speak with your accountant, or you will need to reassess how do you allow for, maybe you have been too tight, or maybe you have been starting off with certain investment, or maybe you have been too speculative with your investments and you didn't have money for pleasure because you try to find your pleasure in the eighth house, okay, in speculative investments, and then you want to paint, or you want to start a garden or something like that, and then you don't have money for that because you lost your money in your speculative investments, and so your sense of pleasure and sense of Risk taking is now asking to be in another place. Maybe now risk taking is to try and grow carrots this season, and then it's another form of risk, and now you're gonna have to pay for these carrots and so on and so forth. Um, Ascendant Libra. So for Ascendant Libra, this is happening in your fourth house, and this is at odds with your seventh. That can be another situation of, a fight between the spouse and the mother or the father. Um, so it can be something like that. We're entering the holiday seasons. So, even though this happens already in January, still, that can be something, like one of these fights that you're caught up in the midst. Um, it can be that you're thinking about getting a new house or signing a contract or moving in together with your partner, and then you have to deal with all, it steers up. In a way, it can be something that is not terrible, because if you're thinking of moving in with, let's say, your boyfriend or your girlfriend, then now these thoughts, these talks, they always tend to bring stuff. And this is actually something lucky, because you will run into those chironic things in your relationship, okay, in your seventh house, and into how those chironic wounds that you or your partner have affect your living together right from the get-go. So that's not something terrible. It's best to have a plan B if you sign a contract, because you will have to redo things. But this can be actually a very good time where why do I say it is good? Because not because it's easy, but because you're going to see what needs to be addressed from the get-go. You're not going to have to wait 10 years of living together before you understand that, like, no, your partner is not going to change in A, Y, and B, and so on and so forth. So that can be something that you need to address. It can be something in relation to where the partner begins to take a parent role, or to remind you, or your upbringing is affecting your partnerships. And that can also happen in business one-to-one partnerships. So the way your parents spend money, now you see your business partner doing that, and you're furious because this is the money of the company, and so on and so forth, or they're being furious with you. That is the kind of thing that you might be coping with, and needing to find a solution where you both respect your partnership and respect your relationship and respect your upbringing and respect your home and respect your parents. So not easy, but you're going to have to accommodate for them both. Okay, you can't erase an Aries, right? So ascendant Scorpio. So for you, this is happening in the third house, and this is at odds with your sixth house. So third house, sixth house. Now it can be that you have a new job, or your daytime job, and your daily routine needs to change. There's some correspondence, there's some communication, maybe with your neighbors, maybe with your siblings, and either the daytime job that you have, or the pet that you have, or a certain health condition changes your daily routine, and you're going to have to give place for whatever that issue is. If it's a pet that you have, the pet is going to need attention, and that might drain on your daily routine or daily communication. Maybe you set up for something with your siblings, so maybe you're going to need your siblings to help you to take care of your pet, and they're going to have an argument about that. Or something, you have to take, let's say, a vacation from your work because your sister is sick, and so on and so forth. So it can be something like that, and you are gonna have to accommodate for both of these during this retrograde. Ascendant Sagittarius. So this is happening in your second house, and it's at odds with your fifth. That can be as simple as your value or what you spend money on, or your skill that helps you make money um, is now challenged by either your hobbies or what you do for fun or your children. So something can happen, it can be like a word that your child says, touches on, or a word that you said because the Mercury is in your second house, or maybe you communicate something that is essential to you, that is of value to you, and it touches on the sense of self of your child. And your child has a wound there that you're dealing with, or that your values are at odds with your hobbies. That can also be the case. Um, with Mercury, there can be something around technologies. It can also be like, you like gaming and your computer has a bug in it, and now you can't do you can't do this new hobby because, hey, now you have to fix your computer, but now you have to spend money on it. But you were planning to save money, but actually your strategy for saving money was to do this type of hobbies that get you in the zone, and then you don't spend money, but now your computer got broken. It is that something that you might have to contend with, that sort of conflict. So that's for Sagittarius. Ascendant Capricorn. So for you, this is happening in your first house, and it is at odds with your fourth house. So your sense of belonging, or something from your upbringing, or something at your home environment is damaged or hurt or wounded. It can be that it's something that you say, that you communicate, that somebody at your home finds disrespectful. But this is more, it's less of a sibling type, but more of like your parents, or your yeah, it's more like your parents, or something in your home environment that is a bit wounded maybe by words that you say, and so you will need to reassess your communication and the way you speak, also the way you speak to yourself, by the way. The way you speak to yourself, it can be self-talk with Mercury in Capricorn and the first house. It can be the way you talk with yourself. You will need to readdress that, to reassess that, and that might be affected by something that happened in your upbringing, and it could be something like deeply psychological like that you have a chance to change. Okay, and then that change might be prolonged because it's Saturn, so you might start a new change, start a new way of self-talk. Perhaps you have been talking yourself in self-deprecative ways, and now you're being awakened that I heard like my parents do, and then I adopted that, and I didn't think much of it, but now that I see it, that's the way that I've been speaking to myself is not a correct way, and it will take time to change that. So it's going to be a Saturn change. It's going to affect like your next 28 years. You're going to be speaking more and more lovingly to yourself, or more and more in the sense of self-belief and self-trust, dedicating time to changing that self-talk or the way you think about yourself, and that will have an accumulating effect of your sense of self. So you will address that home or upbringing or even ancestral wound. So that can be a very difficult but eventually blessed experience. It can be also a bit of altering your communication, the way you communicate yourself when you come to fulfill your life path, because ascendant is also related to the life path. So there can be certain agreements that need to be made or reconsidered, certain communication style that needs to be reconsidered, and so on and so forth. Ascendant Aquarius. So this is happening with Mercury retrograde in your 12th house and Chiron in your 3rd house. So then again, it can be that you unconsciously steer up with your communication, or you have like, you may have an unconscious communication, maybe something that you're communicating without words because it's 12th house, or something in between your words, or something in your phrasing that you're not aware of, damages the sense of self of one of your siblings, or somebody that you see every day. And so you will, like, they might confront you about that, and you might need to reassess your communication. But it's a bit more tricky because you weren't even aware that you're doing that, and then it depends on how willing and aware. And since you're, this is ascendant of Aquarius, and that is a fixed sign, so they might have a hard time getting your attention, let alone your motivation to change. So that one actually can be quite disruptive. Um, Alternatively, it can be that like you need a retreat, and that is in conflict with, let's say, your siblings want to see, or your neighbors want to talk to you, and you actually need to retreat right now, and you have to communicate that, or you say something that's stirring up. So you need your alone time when somebody needs you to be around. It can be something like that. Another thing is, well, if you're dealing with any mental health issues, then you might have to communicate that, or you might have to let down, somebody who's, a neighbor or close to you, or a sibling, because you need to tend to that, to, your mental well-being and so on and so forth. That is like in the more difficult cases. So you need to also check your natal chart if you have any of such connections, and what is the connection of the ruler of the third for you. And last but not least, ascendant Pisces. So this is happening with Mercury in your 11th house of acquaintances, of social, I wanted to say social media, but it's not social media like the third house, it's social media like crowdfunding, acquaintances, conferences, life goals, things that you need to communicate on a large scale, maybe a message you have to deliver to the world, and you're going to have to be rethinking how you communicate with your colleagues, with your acquaintances, how you communicate if you're a public figure. So what is the message? How do you communicate the message? And that will be a change that will affect, have an effect on the long term. And that might be at odds with your values. So there may be that the case that you have a certain value, and the way that you're required to communicate is different to your value. So for me, for example, I'm in business, then I will have to do marketing. And there are certain marketing, if I would go to, let's say, a marketing coach, there are certain strategies that I can think of that are not in alignment with my value, and not in alignment. I don't feel like I am myself if I have to communicate in that way. So you might be required to make a change and to sort of give a place to those places, or you might have to do certain, or maybe the way you spend your money, you're going to have to communicate it to your colleagues or to your acquaintances, or maybe you're doing crowdfunding and then you have your own way of spending your money that you need to communicate, and then that can be at odds because you can't give up. In this case, Aries, your sense of self is tied to your value, and it's and what you spend your money on is tied to your sense of self. So if I can think about such a case where when I was going, the financial crisis of 2008, the expectations of the rehabilitation was that, it's like, oh, you need to pay to find a job and pay your debt. And I was like, no, but I got into a mental crisis because I was working in the best jobs in the market, and still I needed to learn. And so I need to study so that there will be somebody who will eventually pay the debts. And that was one of the best decisions I made in my entire life, because I was forgiven that debt. There were new rules after I finished my first degree, and I was nearing to the end of my second degree. That was literally the best decision I got in my life, because I got funding for studies, and I was forgiven a debt that was created during the financial crisis. And even though I was working in the best of jobs, unfortunately, and so I had to justify my spending habits. Say, no, I'm not going to put myself back in the situation that created the reason that I ended up not nearly in a mental hospital because of work. And I'm not going to go back to the same work that got me into a mental hospital. Okay, I didn't know anything about, like, I didn't know to say gaslighting, I didn't know to say CPTSD, I didn't know to say these words. And you know what? I probably wouldn't have used these words either, because I'm just the type of person that, like, no, I'm not gonna look at, I'm not gonna justify anything. I'm just gonna look at, okay, what are the steps that I made, me, Shirley made, and how am I changing my steps towards a different solution. So if up until now I was looking for a better job and I got better jobs, but it didn't get better, so now I know that studies mean something so important to me, that it's important to my mental well-being, and so I choose studies. Okay, that can be something like that you're dealing with. Now you're going to have to justify the way you spend your money, or the type of skills that you acquire, and but that's something to do with something public. Okay, you can't be going to conferences, and then maybe you got certain budget to do something, and then you need to spend it on a certain something that is relevant to your sense of self. Okay, it's not like Aries in the second house. When I think about it, it's not an easy thing, but here it is. You need to understand what is at stake, and you need to understand how that conflict is related to your sense of self, and you need to give a place to you. Nobody defines you but you. Your colleagues do not define you. Your acquaintances do not define you. When you do a campaign for crowdfunding, your crowd does not define you. Okay, your followers, maybe you're a head of a community, the people in the community, what they think, that even that does not define you. So, so that can be quite difficult. However, yeah, so that can be like the way you spend your money. It can be a value that you have. So that can be also related to marketing. If you have a business, the way you're marketing. So maybe you have a coach or a business coach or a community of marketing, and they all say and they all think that you need to be doing X and you need to be communicating X, and you say, you know, this is not me. This is not me. This is not my value. This is not why I opened the business. This is not how I market my stuff. And then, like, you're going to have to do a different way of crowdfunding. That can be quite painful because your values are at odds with the larger community. Okay? You might be having one of the most difficult times in this retrograde, because your sense of self is tied to your values and is tied to the skills you choose to partake in and what you choose to spend money on. Okay, for example, one of the skills that I have as an astrologer. If somebody comes and tell me, no, get another job, don't do astrology, they might run into a bull. And you know, and my point will be about, well, I have worked for almost 2 decades to perfect and refine what service can I give to society at large that I am whole with, that is in alignment with my values and my sense of self. And I've worked in nearly every industry imaginable that I had access to, including the best of positions that you could get without a degree and sometimes with a degree. And there was always something that's bugging me. And now I found something that I'm okay with. Okay? But then, you know, your acquaintances are like, well, but can't you see that, you know, wouldn't it be more simple to, I don't know, do some ethical hacking or something like that? And then that can be a bit of a difficulty to make, because here your sense of self is tied to your values and is tied to your expenditure. Okay? One of the most difficult people to change are the people whose sense of self is tied to their values and is tied to what they spend their money on. But go and try and change the expenditure habits of a person whose sense of self depends or interrelated with what they spend their money on. Good luck with that. Um, Especially when it's Aries, so it's always something new, it's something innovative, it's something speculative, so it's always the next best thing. That can be, that can be one of the most difficult conflicts because there are just too many things tied to the sense of self. Okay, in the seventh house, it's your partnership ties up to your sense of self. In your first house, it is your sense of self. In your fourth house can be something to do with the upbringing. Your fifth house, your children might have too much to do with your sense of self, and that can hurt the way you're connecting with them, which is another very difficult house. In your second house, it's your expenditure. So there I go, realizing what it's like to actually have Aries in the second house. Well, hello there. Thank you for the likes. I only now I noticed that I did not have new dating for all tastes and ages. Sex find. I'm not looking for sex. Thank you, but it's not helpful. So yeah, that's the messages I've been missing. If you've been trying to write a message to me and I did not see it, then now you're able to, and yes, I will delete those. Pardon me, if you have been looking for, dates for all ages and sexes, then I'm sorry, I cannot help. So that was my Mercury retrograde, and I did even as much as to cover the Mercury retrograde for all 12 ascendants, which I think is lovely. Last Mercury retrograde with Pluto in Capricorn, and I think the midway through the retrograde, Pluto is already delving into Aquarius, but the retrograde shade is not touching Pluto. So all in all, just not your usual Mercury retrograde video. And yeah, I'll just go ahead and find the next topic for my next video. I do have 2 more channels that I'm trying to promote here. I'm actually having technological issues that are very interesting. So let's take a look at these 2 channels.